boys were born 6 weeks premature, but because they were just either side of the 5-pound marker, they weren't put into the neonatal intensive care. They came straight home with me once we'd been discharged. Before we left, we weren't really, we had the usual hearing test and things like that, but we weren't briefed on any of the illnesses that were going around or any of the signs to look out for, particularly not bronchiolitis, which, given that they were 6 weeks premature and therefore quite susceptible to such an illness, is quite surprising, actually. I think you're so caught up in the kind of the feeding and the sleep or the sleeplessness of newborn twins, and you kind of need to be told more about what the signs and symptoms you need to be looking out for are, what illnesses are going around at that time of year that may affect them or that is more likely to affect them because they're little. Edwin, to begin with, started taking slightly longer pauses in breath, and I don't mean a really long gap, I just mean just at that point where you think, oh, then they breathe again. Now I know that up to 5 seconds pause is quite normal and quite healthy in a baby, but beyond that isn't. The symptoms that the boys had were, they kind of, I now call it chugging, where when they're breathing, they're sort of doing a lot of this as they go up. It's like the top part of their body is kind of chugging away, and they were getting this kind of sucking in around the rib area, where when they were breathing in, the skin was kind of recessing into the gaps that were there. And they had things like this nostril flare, so when you breathe in, the nostrils go wider, which are all signs that the body isn't coping and is trying to get as much oxygen in as possible. Sadly for us, we were at the very extreme end of this illness, and most people don't go through exactly what we did, but because we didn't know about bronchiolitis, because we didn't know any of the signs and symptoms, things got quite bad before we got help. Unfortunately for us, Edwin had to be taken in an ambulance, and in the end they realised that his body was so tired from dealing with this illness that he just couldn't cope anymore. So he actually had to be ventilated and taken to a paediatric intensive care unit, where he had to stay on the ventilator for a few days to allow his body the time to rest and to get a bit better before they could then allow his body to then start dealing with the illness. The staff were fantastic, and he did get treatment, and surprisingly we went from sort of one awful extreme where he was so unbelievably poorly to a week later where he was like a different child, and he had colour back, and he was healthy, he was breathing on his own again, he was feeding brilliantly, and he's gone on to be a fantastically strong little boy. And that was just kind of this blip caused by lack of information, I guess. And then when he got better, his brother decided that he wanted to do the same. And thankfully with him, because we now did know a lot more of the signs and symptoms, it didn't get quite as severe. And it hit them both in the same way. It just overwhelmed their little bodies, because at the time that this happened, they were both just shy of their due date, so they were still premature. They still shouldn't have even been born by this point. So you can imagine how small and vulnerable they were. They're now in the 95th percentile, which means they're very big and very strong for their age. They're two strapping young boys now who are 2.5 and very determined. If you're not sure and it doesn't look right, and it looks to you like the baby might be in any way struggling, get them seen sooner rather than later, because it could save you. I mean, we are very much on the extreme of what happened, and had we had these tips ourselves, we would have saved ourselves a very difficult period in our lives, and the boys wouldn't have had to go through that, so we could have got them the help earlier.